So this channel is called the Fixed Protocol channel. So don't you think I should talk a little bit about the Fixed Protocol? Well, today I'm going to give you a lesson. It's been quite a while since I've done any of these. Today's lesson is going to be about a concept referred to as repeating groups. So I'm going to give you the basics of what a repeating group is, and I'm going to show you an example of the usage of a repeating group in a fixed message. So we're going to look at an actual fixed message that I generated, and I'm going to break it down for you piece by piece. Now, before we do that, let me make sure that the live stream is good to go. Gotta love it. It still says waiting for me, even though we are live. Let me double check here. One moment. Gotta love YouTube. So, there we go. It says live. And it still says waiting for me. So, I don't understand. Let's get rid of that. And let's look at one of the other videos. And let's back up. And there it says live again. All right. We are live. So I can see it. All right. Outstanding. So again, we're covering repeating groups. So what does it mean in terms of repeating groups? What does that mean? It means it's a group that's repeating. I'll give you a scenario of why you would want to use a repeating group and how it is used. So in post trading, so of course you have the trading where, or trading, not the trading, you have trading where that's order entry, so I want to make a trade, doesn't matter whether it's equities, options, currencies, doesn't matter. Bottom line is the fundamentals. I have something that, and I have something and someone else has something else that I want, right? So I've got A, you've got B, I want B, you want A, right? We want to trade. Whatever I have, you want. Whatever you have, I want. So in the situation of when you're looking at, let's say, equities, let's say I have Apple stock, right? I have Apple stock, but what I want is cash. I want to liquidate my stock to get cash, right? You have cash, but you want Apple stock, right? So there's a trade, all right? So you got Apple stock, you got the cash. I want your cash, you want my stock. So I give you my Apple stock, and then you give me the cash in return. There's a trade, right? Currencies, same thing. It's just that you're doing currency for currency as opposed to asset for currency, right? I mean, currency itself, I'm sure, is considered to be an asset, obviously, but I think you know what I mean. So generally, when we think about most transactions, we usually think about some kind of product that we exchange for currency, but with currency trading, you're trading currency for currency, right? So I have $1, you have how much ever francs, I want the francs, you want the dollar. It's the same thing, right? So that's the trading side of things. Post-trading is where you have to clear and you have to settle. For example, clearing at the most fundamental part is basically where I've done a transaction, you've done a transaction, do we match up? Is this transaction valid? My understanding is I bought 100, your understanding is you sold me 100, we agree, good to go. Valid trade, no issues, clear, right? That's super, super simplified. There's more to it than that, but just think about that on the most fundamental sense. As far as the next step would be settlement, which is where you are doing delivery, right? So I agree that I bought 100 Apple, you agree that you sold me 100 Apple, certain price, right? And now that we agree, I say, yeah, I agree. We both agree, we're cleared, trade is cleared. Now we want to actually settle. So therefore, that's where you're going to move the assets. So, and then there's different scenarios. I'm really oversimplifying it, but from the most fundamental idea, if I am buying something, right? Let's say if I'm buying an equity stock, this is where the money is moved, right? So I am buying something, I'm going to do some kind of money transfer so I can actually pay for it, and then I'm going to receive the stock that I purchased. So that's it. Getting a little bit into too much detail, we did want to focus mainly on the fixed message, but I wanted to give you guys some background. So now let's look at an actual fixed message. So, and I guess before we do that, I want to first illustrate the purpose of the repeating groups. So in the post-trade process, we want to, as I just illustrated, want to verify the actual transaction that occurs. Both parties want to agree. So how do you do that? You need to provide some sort of receipt, right? Receipt of the transaction, right? Or a trade report, right? So a trade report, basically, you have two parties that they're doing a transaction. On one side, I'm going to say, this is what I know doing. These are the prices, quantities, securities, assets, whatever, right? Other side says, this is what I know doing. These are the prices, these are the size, currencies, everything, right? And we want to match that up. So how do you translate that into FIX? Obviously, FIX is the electronic way of transmitting trade information. So if we're talking about transmitting post-trade information, we can also use FIX to do that, right? So we would send trade reports, and remember there's two of them, right? There's basically, we consider them two legs. So you have, I'll give you a typical scenario. We have what we call a client leg and an LP leg. So client, generally speaking, you have a liquidity provider, right? Liquidity provider is generally going to stream prices, right? So they stream prices, and the client is going to see those prices, and based on what is being offered, they can basically hit or respond or basically send an order out. So basically think of the liquidity provider sending quotes to the client. Client sees those quotes, likes one of the quotes, or they want to respond to it. They generate an order in response to those quotes. That order is filled. After that trade is complete, then you want both sides to send reports, right? So client side sends a report of what they know doing, and then in addition to that, the liquidity provider sends their side. So we're talking about two separate messages, ideally, but the catch is, well, it's not a catch, but where the repeating groups comes into play is you've got two fundamental ways of how you can handle this scenario. You can send two trade reports, and that's one way of sending the post-trade messages. You can also use a variation of an execution report. Normally when you have trading, you have execution reports, which you can see the status of the order, how much is filled, how much is left on the order, right? So you're getting the execution details. We can use a variation of that, or the execution report itself can be used in post-trading as well. Now, the execution report is generally something that's passed between parties in the trading world, right? So you have a trading session where order goes out, execution report comes back, order is acknowledged, order is filled, order is partial filled, completely filled, all that stuff going between the trading session. But you can also set up a drop copy post-trading session where you can use an execution report or a variation of the execution report to report the transactions that occurred in the trading session. But typically what you want to use is the trade capture report, which is the 35 equals AE. Now again, we need two messages for both parties. So you have the client side and you have the liquidity provider side, right? So two fundamental ways you can handle this is you can send two reports, either one execution report for one leg, another execution report for the other leg, or one trade capture report for one leg, another trade capture report for the other leg, right? You can use those two message formats. But the two ways that you can deliver these reports is in a single message or in two messages. Now, the example I just gave were two messages. I send a report, you send a report. Those are two messages, right? But this is where the repeating groups comes into play. So I can actually use a single message to indicate both legs of the trade. So how can you do that? How can you, in a single message, indicate both legs of a trade? Essentially, you're combining two messages into one. How can you communicate two different things in one message, right? Normally, each message generally communicates a singular concept. I send you a 35 equals D. The concept is this is an order, right? This is an order. Order consists of details, timestamps, right? If I send you an execution report, generally speaking, single concept. I'm sending you the execution details on an execution, right? And although I'm saying execution, technically you can have an acknowledgement message. So in 39 equals 0 in response to an order. Obviously, status of new is not really an execution. Executions would be partial fill, complete fills, right? So 39 equals 1 and 2, partial fill, complete fill. But for the sake of simplicity, let's just call them executions, right? So how can you transmit two things in one message? Repeating groups. Repeating groups are nothing more than, I guess you could consider it to be a format that you can use for fixed messages. A format in which you're able to communicate two concepts or two separate pieces of information in a single message. Now, that's not the most accurate way to describe it. I mean, typical fixed messages communicate more than one thing, right? An order is not going to just say symbol. It's going to say symbol, side, quantity, price, right? But I think, I don't know what the right word is to use for this. I guess typically everything in a message generally refers to, typically, right, with exceptions, generally refers to information about one thing. It may be a bunch of details, but it's about one thing. For example, I can say wheels, windows, steering wheel, engine, doors. I'm communicating several things, but it's all about one theme, one subject. I'm talking about a car, right? Several items, several details, several parameters, but I'm talking about a car. That's typically how a fixed message is, right? Generally speaking, you wouldn't have butterfly doors, right? Normal doors, V12, V6, 4-cylinder, right? You wouldn't have all these different things in one message, right? You wouldn't have, you wouldn't have generally one message that's referring to two different executions or two different orders, generally speaking, right? There's exceptions. So with repeating groups, I'm going to show you exactly how you can communicate information about two different, well, in this case, I guess let's talk about what we're talking about. We're talking about executions, right? So we can communicate about two different executions, and that's not even the most accurate way to describe it as well, because essentially it's the same execution. If I buy 100 shares of something, someone else is selling me, right? If I'm buying 100, like there's someone on the other side of that. If I'm buying, someone's selling. It's a single transaction, but there's two sides to that transaction. On my side, I have a buy transaction. On the other side, they have a sell transaction. But essentially, they're two sides of the same coin, right? It's all one order, but there's two sides to it, right? So let's take a look at I'm going to show you a repeating group message. and we are going to break it all down. So, I apologize if this microphone does not work properly, but this is a new setup for me. Let's see. Okay. All right. Hopefully, let's see. I'm gonna pause for a second here and let the live stream catch up. I'm watching the live stream live on my phone, so I'm gonna let it catch up. As you can see, it's delayed on the phone, so it's really delayed. It's really delayed. I just want to make sure that you can see the screen properly and everything before we get started. Hopefully the sound is good. Wow, this is way behind. Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. I need to get to the live section. All right, so this looks good. It was behind. You got the live button. So we are up to date. Let me make sure the sound is good. Okay, I apologize for that. And actually, I apologize. That is not what we want to do. So what we want to do is this. It's a new setup, I apologize. Because this is the whiteboard where I can actually interact and show you guys different things. I don't want to screen share, I want you guys to see this. All right, so I'm now looking, I just want to see how good it is. You guys can see the fixed message. So that looks pretty good. Hopefully it's big enough. I can't really zoom in. I can try to move this a little bit closer, but I can't really zoom in. So I know you guys have complained in the past about not being able to see stuff on the screen, so I'm doing my very best to ensure that is not the case. I guess I should stand on this side, close to the microphone. All right, that looks good. That looks good enough. I'm looking at it on a small screen, so it probably looks much better on a big screen. But even on a cell phone, this looks pretty good. So, all right, so here is a fixed message. It looks like the Matrix. It's very confusing. What is going on? Well, I'm going to break this down, basically manually parse this so we can see what's going on. But right off the bat, just some things. We can see the fixed version listed here. Let me get my pen. Fixed version listed there. We can see that this is going to this entity. What else can we see? We can't even see everything. I see Q quantity over here, 14 equals 1. I see status of 0, so it's like an acknowledgement message. I see quantity of 1. That's how many it is. And there's a price here, 44, 105.99. Side is sell, 54 equals 2. We see over here, we see exec type, we see leaves quantity, so there's nothing open on this order. We see the repeating groups tag, we're going to get into that, saying 2 groups. We see the first group beginning with 448. I see the second group beginning with 448. I see there are sub-IDs listed here. I'm going to get into that. We see a classification of this tag, 448. Now, bear with me. I'm running through this very quickly, but we're going to break this down into a more digestible format for you guys. So I just wanted you guys to experience the whole flow in terms of, for you guys that are learning, you should be able to, even in this format where it looks jumbled, and this comes with experience, you should be able to go ahead and grab out all these details just like I did. And again, it comes with experience. It may be intimidating at first for you guys, but just stick to it. It's practice, 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 practice. Try to read as much raw messages as possible. But this is how I read fixed messages all the time, raw, not all the time, but most of the time. So you should be able to do this as well. However, for the sake of the lesson, I'm going to basically break this down. So I'm going to parse this out for you. So we're going to do that manually. So we're going to go ahead and grab, there's a fixed version, execution report. So there's an execution report there. Sequence number coming from 49. And what else do we have here? So there is 56. And let's go ahead and grab the queue quantity and the symbol and exec ID, order ID, and quantity, right? And then side and symbol, and then we just have this time value, and then we have over here exec ID, leaves quantity, and then here's the repeating groups that I wanted to talk about, and first group, and where's our second group? Second group is here, and then we have our checksum, and we're good to go. So this is so zoomed in that you can't really see everything. So what I'm going to do is to make these two lines, and there we go. All right, so we're going to run through this. It's a much better format for you guys to see. So, and I apologize for the echo. This is probably not the best setup as far as the microphone, but just bear with me. So, we have the fixed version. We have, what else? So we have execution report, 35 equals 8. Sequence number is 12. This message is coming from sender right here, 49, sender comp. And it is being sent to this target comp, 56 equals, right? It's a message from sender to, right? And I know we're not even getting to the repeating group stuff. So now you see some standard execution report values. Queue quantity, how many shares. We see the type of currency, US dollars. There's an execution ID here, right? So that's the first screen. And let's move on. So here we see some order details. How many? 1, quantity. Whoop, that's not what we want to do. So that's 1. We see status of 0. That's like what you would see on an acknowledgement message, right? So status of new. We see here 44 equals 105.99. That is your price. Side is sell. 54 equals 2. Symbol is 55. This is an NDF of some sort, BGP. And we have here, what else do we have here? So we have some time, and then we have exec type, 150 equals 0. We have leaves quantity of 0. So there's nothing open on this order at this point. Now typically, again, you would not be using an execution report for post-trade, would be at 35 equals AE. So some of these values are not really relevant, right? Because this is an order status, right? We don't care about the fact that there's nothing open on the order, right? That's not a post-trade thing. That's a trading thing. I'm working an order and I want to keep track of the status of my order. Do I have any open shares? How many, well, if it's equities, right? I want to see how much has been executed, what's the status of my order, is it canceled, is it active? I want to see those kind of details. So these are really, really trading related tags that we see here. But as you know, fix is not something that is cookie cutter to where, you know, every single person is going to use the same exact tag, same exact value, same exact strategy formats. No. Think of the fix protocol as a lot of times it's suggestions or guidelines to follow, right? But you can sort of shift things up however you want to, as long as both parties agree on that, right? If I'm going to change up the fix protocol and do things differently, if I want to do 54 represents the time of the day, that's fine, assuming that whoever I'm trading with or sending messages to, they agree and we both understand each other. But generally speaking, that's bad practice. 54 is supposed to be used for side, so it should be used as such. 54 equals 2 is, you know, as per the protocol means sell. That's how you should be using it, but you don't have to. So that's why you might see stuff like this, which really doesn't make sense. And that's supposed to be a question mark. Let's do it. There you go. Doesn't make sense in an execution report or post-trading scenario. So now the next message here of significance that I want you guys to focus on is now we're getting into the repeating group, right? Getting a lot of material today, a lot more than repeating groups, but here it is. So first thing here is 453 equals 2. You can look up what that tag means, but this basically is telling you that you have two groups coming up. And I broke the two groups here separately. First group is here. Second group is here. So instead of sending two different messages with this kind of information, I am sending one message. Remember, this is one fixed message we're looking at. I just broke it up into sections. We're sending one fixed message, which is indicating two legs, right? So this is one side. So remember we talked about, you know, I am doing a transaction against someone else, right? I'm buying, they're selling. So I send a report of what I know doing. They send a report of what they know doing. Now with two messages. Here, we can do it in one message where this is one side, this is the other side. Now, you may be wondering, how can this tell information about what two parties did in a transaction? You don't see quantity, right? You don't see price. Well, in this particular scenario, one would logically presume that those elements are not relevant. There are certain scenarios where, say, a transaction occurs at an exchange based on the workflow, things can be sort of considered to be pre-cleared in a way to where the venue at which the transaction occurred is to be able to sort of validate that this actually occurred, right? And I know being kind of vague, I don't want to get into too much extraneous details, but just consider that there's scenarios where a transaction will occur where there isn't that need to, you know, how much do you know doing and how much do you don't need that, right? You know that the transactions that occurred, you know that you basically think of it as it's pre-cleared. However you are able to validate both sides of a trade, it doesn't really matter necessarily, it's just that you do that. So let's just say that in this scenario, there is another method to where both sides of the trade are verified in the trading part of things, right? So when you start getting to post-trade where you're sending your reports to your sponsor, custodian, whoever it is, basically you don't need to confirm, oh, 100 shares over there, 100, you don't need to do that, right? So in those scenarios, all you're really identifying is both sides of the trade. The details of the trade we saw was up in, further up in the message, right? So we do say side, quantity, price, but in this scenario, both sides already match. right? There's no need to distinguish between, oh, what he did and what someone else did. It's already matched, right? So all we is the trade details one time, because it applies to both sides, and then we need to determine who are the parties trading. Just like before, as far as routing, we saw the sender comp, target comp. This is a message coming from, to, right? So if the trade details you saw in this message are for two counterparties, two individuals, two firms, right? Then who are those individuals and what are their roles? So this doesn't really tell you that much, but there's other formats where we'll identify the role. This is the executing side. This is the sponsor side, right? Sponsor being, you know, like for example, you have a trade that is done on behalf of someone else, right? So that's a scenario where you have a sponsor, and there's other scenarios. I'll get into that in other videos, but in this scenario, not applicable. All that is needed here is to identify the two counterparties. So again, 453 equals 2. How many repeating groups are coming, right? The repeating groups you can delineate in your mind when you're looking at this message by tag 448, right? Tag 448 is in this repeating group, and again, there's different formats. This repeating group, that could be considered your delineation, or that's your marker, right? Just like you see caret A is the limiter for the fixed message. When I see caret A, I know that is the end of that tag value. And another tag value pair is coming up, right? So as far as the repeating groups, the caret A is the 448. When I see 448, I know this begins a new group. When I see another 448, this begins second group. These are the two groups referenced in 453 equals 2, right? So keep in mind though, I'm not saying that 448 is, you know, whenever I'm looking at repeating groups, that's the tag that you always look for. I'm not saying that necessarily. In this case, it is based on the way this message is being transmitted. But what you want to do is, first of all, recognize 453 equals 2. And then you want to recognize what is the next tag. Typically what you're going to see is that the repeating groups will begin with the same tag, right? So if I see 453 equals 2, I see the next tag in value, I'm going to look for another occurrence of this tag to be the beginning of the next group, right? So 453 equals 2. So there are two groups coming up. So how am I going to see the beginning of the groups? What's the next tag? 448. Okay, so I'm going to look for another 448 to know where the next group begins. Ah, there's another group, right? Ah, there's another 448 if there was like 3 groups, 4 groups, right? Oh, 448, 448, 4. Okay, so those are all the groups. Every time I see this tag, whatever first tag is, I know that's the beginning of another group, right? How do you know the end? Kind of the same thing. I mean, you know, the last tag before the next one of these, right? This is our initiating tag or primary tag, or whatever you want to call it. So I guess there's no real purpose to looking for the end of the group because we know where the next one begins. So obviously you can extrapolate where it ends, right? So there you have it. Now, as far as what information is being conveyed, again, don't look at this tag as like, oh, 448 is the beginning of the repeating group. Look at it for what it is. Look it up. Look at what 448 is. If you look it up, you will see that basically we're using 448 in conjunction with 523. So let's get a different color here. So we are using 448 in conjunction with 523. I gotta be careful of going off to the edge there. 523. 448 in conjunction with 523. So basically, think of it as this is a sub designation and this is the main designation of counterparties. 523 being a sub designation and that being a main designation. Now, there's different ways you can use this. In this scenario, that's what we're communicating. Remember, we need to identify who these trades are between. Who and who. So in this case, it is Carl LP. We can presume LP meaning liquidity provider, but that doesn't matter. we can assume this trade is between Carl LP and Carl CLT, right? It's between Carl LP and CLT. But there is a subcategory, a sub-designation for Carl LP. In this case, we can presume that this is an account. So the entity being Carl LP and the account for that entity being Carl account 1. Maybe Carl LP has multiple accounts, so we know that it's Carl LP trading against Carl CLT, but which Carl LP account should this transaction be applied to? Oh, it's Carl account 1, right? So that is how you could interpret these messages. Again, it really depends on what was agreed upon by the counterparties, but that's a way that I would interpret this. Beyond that, I think we have covered most of it. We can look at roles, which I missed out on here. Now, this is your homework. I'm going to make you guys look this up. We can look at 452 equals 1 and 452 equals 17. That is probably going to tell you a little bit about what's happening here. Something is happening between this individual and that individual. But regarding that thing that's happening, what is the role that this individual is playing? What is the role that that individual is playing? So look at that type, 452 equals 1. And I think that's it. Of course, we end with our checksum, which is for message integrity validation, whatever you want to call it. We want to verify that what is transmitted is what's received. So we have tag 9 and tag 10, tag 9 in the beginning and tag 10 at the end. Based on these values, the fix engine will do certain validation. And there you have it. So that is repeating groups. I don't know why I just did that. I guess that's how I'm going out with a bang on this. So yeah, so that's repeating groups. If you guys have any questions, feel free to let me know. I'd be glad to answer those questions. This is one scenario. I'm going to be going over additional scenarios of repeating groups and you know what they mean, and just more. I mean, this is something, a very basic message. I want to look at a trade capture report message as well and go into more detail about that message type. Also, again, more variations of repeating group scenarios as well. So, if you you